At this point, you're probably already aware of the tragic Jacob Blake shooting. If you're not, then that's fairly surprising. But what we're going to do in this video is find out the real story, what really happened that day. And we're also going to look at the story of Kyle Rittenhouse. Who is he and how is he related? Let's find out. We'll start with this article, which shows a timeline of what led up to the shooting of Jacob Blake. The first thing we know is that at 5:11, officers were sent to Blake's address because a dispatcher had been called and a woman said that Blake, quote, isn't supposed to be there and he took the complainant's keys and is refusing to give them back. So we already know the cops are going there because they were called on Jacob Blake. The police are then told by the dispatcher that there is a warrant for his arrest. PolitiFact expounds on that a little bit in this article, and they say that Blake did have an active warrant from a May 2020 incident where he is accused of sexually assaulting a woman and stealing her debit card and car keys. They also point out that the police dispatcher alerted responding officers to the warrant according to the scanner audio. The cops were called on Jacob Blake, and when they got there, they already knew that he had an arrest warrant for sexual assault. Now, this is unfortunately where things get a little bit murky. We're not sure what happened next. All we know is that we can see this video where there is very clearly an altercation between the police and Blake, and that they're on the ground, though Blake somehow breaks free and begins to walk around the car to the other side. At some point during this altercation, the police also try to tase him, but it doesn't work. Now let's look at a different angle. I'm going to pause it before the shooting actually happens because I just don't want to show that in this video. And right there is when they begin shooting, and they shoot him something like 7 times in the back. He falls down. Now, before we look into more depth about this, after the shooting, this is what happens. At 5:15, an officer reports that shots were fired, and they tell the dispatcher that we need rescue ASAP. Another video shows that the police officers are working to save Blake's life as they're waiting for an ambulance. We also know that after this, there was a knife found in Blake's car on the ground. So we don't entirely know what he was walking to the car for. If you're one of these police officers, you already know that he's been accused of sexual assault and there's a current warrant out for his arrest. You also know he never complied with what you ordered him to do. There was an altercation where he was on the ground and he broke free. You tried to tase him, but it didn't stop him. You told him not to go into the car and he did anyway. And even when you were pointing your guns at him, he still walked into the car, opened the door, and seemingly reached for something. That's not what you do when the cops tell you to stop. Rather than place all the blame on the cops and saying they shouldn't have shot him, what options would they have had at that point? Like seriously, let's say he had a gun in the car. He grabbed the gun, turned around, and started shooting at them. Let's say he didn't. They already tried to tase him. They tried to physically pin him to the ground. It didn't work. Should they have just walked away and let him drive away? The problem is there really weren't good options here. Again, he was possibly reaching for a knife that was in his car. If they hadn't done anything, he might have stabbed them. Now, this is where I need to point out that it is true there were children in the backseat, Jacob Blake's children, which is horrific. I can't even imagine how traumatic this experience must have been for them. And I feel deeply sorry for them. They did nothing wrong. But I also think that Jacob Blake should have been a better example. Rather than resist arrest, he should have complied. He should have gone with the officers. He shouldn't have broken free, shouldn't have walked towards the car. Also, he was walking towards the car while their guns were pointed on him. He was kind of directing guns closer to where his children were. In a discussion on Facebook, I saw someone trying to justify these actions of Blake, saying that if he was being pinned down by the police, he would try everything in his power to also stand up and go protect his children, which is a stupid idea. If you're being pinned down by the police, the last thing you want to do is first, show your children that it's okay to defy police, but second, go to where your children are and bring them into the line of fire. That's a horrible idea. Again, we still don't know everything that happened. We don't know how the altercation first took place. But based on what I've seen, I would say that it was justified. If the officers have tased you, tried to pin you to the ground, you keep going, and you reach into your car, they don't know if you have a gun or not. And so they're going to act as if you do. Again, it's not a good thing he was shot. I'm not saying it is, but that doesn't mean it wasn't justified. And saying these police officers are murderers and they should be fired, that's ridiculous. There should be an investigation, 100%. But I do not think it's going to find them guilty of murder. And we need to wait for more evidence. These things always happen where it comes out, people immediately assume whatever they think is right, and then they ignore the evidence that comes out. You know, like the fact that he had a knife in the car, or the fact that he had an arrest warrant out and the cops knew about it. These things were not known at the beginning, but it's still not really changing anyone's mind because they're already set in stone. Speaking of which, now let's look at Kyle Rittenhouse, who was also in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Before we give you any of the details, I'm just going to show you what the media and what some Democratic members of Congress have to say about him. Keep in mind, he's only 17. Ayanna Pressley said the following: "A 17-year-old white supremacist domestic terrorist drove across state lines armed with an AR-15. He shot and killed 2 people who had assembled to affirm the value, dignity, and worth of Black lives." And then Chris Murphy, another Democrat in Congress, said, "I wonder why a deranged white nationalist Trump supporter would show up to a protest with a rifle and start shooting people." We also have this article from The Atlantic saying that Rittenhouse appears to live in a fantasy world where police and car dealerships are more endangered than unarmed black men, and where he is a warrior. They finish out the article like this: "I can only imagine his fear when he saw the crowd coming for him, and the crowd's fear when it saw that a near child was wildly firing a rifle better suited to a person with judgment and good training. I do not expect that the jury will be forgiving." So with all of that, you might think that Kyle was in fact a white supremacist. He just came in and started shooting people for no reason because he's a horrible person. But that's not true at all. This is the problem with jumping on a narrative before you have any of the facts. None of that is true. Here's the truth. This article from the New York Times is the timeline of what happened with Kyle Rittenhouse. First, it's important to point out that yes, he is 17, and yes, he had a rifle, but he was also a trained EMT. And before any of the shooting happened, before any of that, the New York Times says that he was offering medical assistance to protesters. So it doesn't really seem like he was a domestic terrorist or a white supremacist if he's helping people out who are injured. I mean, if he was going there to shoot protesters, then he would have done it. He wouldn't have helped them. So now let's look at the first shooting. Once again, we don't know everything that happened here. We don't know what led up to this. But we do know that he was running from a group of people. Again, we don't know why they were chasing him. This is what it says: "While Mr. Rittenhouse was being pursued by the group, an unknown gunman fires into the air, though it's unclear why." And that we can see highlighted on the left-hand side of the screen. Mr. Rittenhouse turns towards the sound of gunfire, which is natural, as another pursuer lunges toward him from the same direction. Mr. Rittenhouse then fires 4 times and appears to shoot the man in the head. So you have a gun, you hear someone shoot, you turn towards that sound because that's natural, and you see someone right there lunging at you. What are you going to do? Do you just sit there and let him take you down and do who knows what? You don't know who had the gun. This is a very bad situation. And this leads to the second shooting, which we can see here. From that clip, we can see that Kyle tripped as he was running and people decided to swarm him. That someone came up and almost hit him or did hit him with a skateboard. His response was to defend himself and shoot that person. There was also someone else with a pistol who he shot in the arm so that he could not get shot. So yes, Kyle did shoot 3 people, 2 of which have died, which is sad. It's a tragedy. But he's not a white supremacist terrorist just going to shoot random protesters. He was defending himself. Now, you can argue he shouldn't have put himself in that situation, and I would agree. It's good that he's going to help as an EMT, but he's not even from Kenosha, and he certainly should not have brought a gun to try and protect someone else's property, because that's why he said he was there. He should have stayed away from it entirely. But that does not mean that it's warranted that people decide to jump him, try and shoot him, do who knows what to him. So once again, this is an example of the media, and many Democrats, jumping on the narrative that Kyle must have been this horrible white supremacist racist because he shot people. But that's not what really happened, at all. Keep in mind that Kyle has since been arrested and is being charged. Now, I don't think they'll go with murder because I don't think you can really show that. He didn't have intent to kill people or he would have done it already. He was there for what seems like hours helping people out before any of the altercations happened. So at the very least, it cannot be premeditated murder. I've seen people try to make that claim and it makes no sense. He took the gun to protect himself, which may not have been the best idea, but he didn't take it with the sole intention of shooting people, or he would have done that significantly earlier. And to show you that the media bias is not just around these 2 individuals, let's look at this still image from CNN, which is perhaps one of the funniest things I have ever seen from CNN, which is, the most trusted name in news. You can clearly see there's a CNN reporter, and there's a lot of fire going on in the background, and it says fiery, but mostly peaceful protests. Which, I don't know who wrote that, but they probably have been fired, because that's absurd. Looking at that, it doesn't look like it's mostly peaceful. I guess at CNN, they were thinking that a few buildings were burnt to the ground and all of these cars were burnt, but it's still mostly peaceful. I mean, you can burn someone's property and be peaceful about it, right? That's so absurd. And that just shows the media narrative that we've seen for the past few months. Yes, there are looters, and yes, there are rioters. Pointing that out is not racist in any way, which is the claim that was made here on Facebook, which is fairly absurd. It's one thing to protest. Protesting is within our rights. Rioting and looting is not. It does not matter if you think you're justified, you're not. You can't just destroy someone else's property because you're upset about something. That's not how it works. That's not how it ever should work. But that's essentially the cycle we've been seeing for the past few months. Something happens, they take it wildly out of context, much like the Chicago shooting that happened just a few weeks ago, and then things are burned and looted and chaos ensues. I do not see how this is going to help the Democrats in any way. When they try and pretend that it's fiery but mostly peaceful, people aren't really buying that. That's basically what happened with Jacob Blake and who Kyle Rittenhouse is. Even if you think that the Jacob Blake shooting was warranted, it's still a tragedy. Every time a human life is lost, it's a tragedy. But a tragedy does not necessarily mean unjustified. I would ask you for your thoughts, but you're probably going to tell me them anyway, so just have at it. Let me know what you think. If there's anything you think I missed that you can prove with a source, go ahead and let me know. And if you have any questions about the things that I've said, check out the sources down in the description. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.